The 1930s Duluth ore dock dumper stands high above the harbor before dawn, and tonight we walk beside him into the slow, iron-colored work that almost no one remembers. There is no hurry here, only the weight of the shift settling around us, while Lake Superior breathes in the dark below. The air is cold enough to make the railings sting your palm, and the dock timbers hold yesterday's dampness like a quiet memory. You can smell ore dust before you see it. A dry mineral smell mixed with lake water, coal smoke, wet rope, and the faint sourness of old grease pressed into bolts and hinges. Somewhere down below, a chain knocks softly against steel, and a switch engine coughs in the yard with the low patience of something that has worked all night and will work again. We are in Duluth, in the 1930s, on an ore dock where iron from the Mesabi Range has come down by rail to meet the waiting holds of lake boats. The men whose names filled newspapers were usually mine owners, railroad presidents, ship captains, and steelmen far away in cities where the furnaces burned. But up here, on the top of the dock, there is another worker, quieter than the engines and smaller than the structure around him, whose job is to guide the ore through its last short fall from rail car to pocket. You might not notice him in an old photograph. Your eyes would go first to the long dock stretching out into the harbor, then to the black ore cars lined above, then to the freighter lying below like a dark sleeping animal. Only after that might you see a shape near the track, a man in a cap and heavy coat, standing where the work narrows to a lever, a latch, a hand signal, and a practiced glance into the machinery of the day. That is the ore dock dumper of Duluth, and part of why nobody remembers him is that his work vanished inside a larger motion. The ore came from the range, the railroad brought it, the ship carried it, the mill consumed it, and the dumper stood in the middle of all that movement, doing the small, precise thing that allowed the next thing to happen. His labor did not make a grand story by itself. It made a sound, again and again, as iron ore dropped into the dark wooden or steel pockets below. Before the first cars are brought forward, you stand with him in the grey hour when the dock seems almost too large for the human body. The deck runs out toward the lake in a long, narrow road of rails, planks, pipes, and shadows. Below the deck, the storage pockets hang like deep bins, each one waiting to receive its measure of ore, and below those pockets the chutes angle down toward the vessel slips, where later men will lower spouts and guide the flow into the holds. The whole place is built on gravity, and gravity is a patient foreman. It does not shout. It simply waits until a door opens. You feel that patience in the way the dumper checks his footing, because the top of an ore dock is not a place for careless movement, even when the work is familiar. Frost may lie thin on the boards in spring. Rain may leave a gloss on the iron. Ore dust settles everywhere, in seams of coat cloth, in the creases of gloves, on the brim of a cap, and by the end of a shift it darkens the skin around the eyes, so that a man looks as though he has been standing too close to a stove. He carries no famous tool, nothing that would sit under glass in a museum with a bright label beside it. What matters is the feel of the release, the stubborn latch, the pry bar if a door hangs up, the whistle signal, the brakeman's wave, and the careful memory of which car is over which pocket. The work is not glamorous, but it is exact, and in the quiet before it begins, you can almost hear all the stored motion waiting inside the cars behind us. A loaded ore car is a modest thing compared with a lake freighter, but when you stand beside one close enough to touch its cold side, it becomes a little cliff of iron and timber and rivets. The ore inside is not glowing, not molten, not dramatic. It is broken rock, red-brown, blue-black, sometimes dusty, sometimes damp, and it lies with a dull heaviness that seems older than the railroad carrying it. The dumper knows that heaviness through his hands. He knows it by the way a car settles on its springs, by the way wheels creak as the engine nudges a string forward, by the way the bottom doors answer when the latch finally gives. He may not call it poetry, and he may not talk much about it after supper, but his body has learned the language of weight. When the first string of cars comes along the dock, we stand back from the rail and listen. The sound arrives slowly, a clank passing from coupler to coupler, a scrape of flange against curve, then the soft thunder of many small wheels above the hollow pockets. There is steam in the air from the locomotive, and it drifts low across the dock in loose white folds, catching the first weak light over the harbour. You can imagine the dumper lifting one gloved hand. The brakeman watches. The engine eases. A car comes into place over the pocket assigned to it, and the day, which has been waiting in silence, begins its repetition. The latch resists at first, as old metal often does in cold weather. It gives with a jerk. Then the bottom doors open, and ore pours down with a thick rushing sound, not like water and not like grain, but something between a landslide and a long, hard exhale. The whole car trembles as the load leaves it. Dust rises. The pocket below accepts the ore without ceremony. For a moment, the dumper watches the flow. He watches because trouble can hide inside routine. A door may stick, a chunk may bridge across the opening, a car may not empty cleanly. A pocket may be nearing its assigned load. Everything is ordinary until it is not, and so the ordinary receives his full attention. Then the flow thins. A few last stones rattle through. The car is nearly empty. The doors must be reset or checked, depending on the car and the practice of the dock. And another signal passes along the line. The engine eases again. The next car rolls forward, and the whole day narrows into another latch, another opening, another fall. This is the rhythm that leaves few monuments. A miner may be remembered because he entered the earth. A sailor may be remembered because he crossed the lake. A steel worker may be remembered because furnaces throw fire against the night. But the Duluth ore dock dumper stands between these larger images, where the work is mostly repetition, and repetition has a way of becoming invisible once it has done its job well. Still, if we stay with him, if we let the morning unfold at his pace, the forgotten work becomes full of small shapes. There is the black line of ore dust under his nails. There is the taste of cold coffee from a tin cup. There is the rasp of wool at the wrist, the ache in the shoulder from pulling, the brief comfort of leaning out of the wind behind a shed or signal box. There is the lake itself, wide and dark, which seems to notice everything without ever speaking. As the first hour settles into the bones of the day, we follow the Duluth ore dock dumper along the high track, where each loaded car brings the range a little closer to the waiting ship. By now your ears begin to sort the sounds. At first, the ore dock is one large noise, all wheels, chains, engines, doors, and falling rock. But slowly, as you stand with the dumper, each sound takes its own place. The couplers speak in iron knocks. The brake shoes whisper and bite. The car doors complain differently in warm weather than in cold. The ore itself changes voice depending on whether it is dry and loose or damp and clinging. This is one of the things memory rarely keeps. It keeps the big event and loses the small education of the ear. Yet the dumper's day depends on that education, because a familiar sound can tell him whether a car has emptied properly before his eyes confirm it. A clean dump has a full beginning, a heavy middle, and a thinning end, while a bridged load may fall strangely, too short, too sudden, or with an uneasy pause in the middle. You stand near him, not in the way, but close enough to see how little wasted motion there is. He does not hurry in the modern sense. He moves quickly when the work calls for it, but his quickness has no panic in it. One hand rests on the cold iron. One shoulder turns away from the dust. His boots know where the boards are worn smooth, and where a man should not trust a shadow. On a 1930s Duluth dock, the ore is not just ore in a general way. It is graded, weighed, billed, assigned, and blended, with clerks and foremen keeping track of what must go where. The dumper may not hold all the paperwork in his hand, but he works inside its pattern. This car goes to this pocket. That pocket will feed that part of the vessel. A mistake is not a story for him. It is a delay, a correction, a quiet tightening of faces among men who prefer the shift to keep moving. The pocket below is both simple and clever. It is a bin, but it is also a promise. Ore drops into it from above, waits there in darkness, and later moves again through a chute into a ship's hold. The dock is really a machine for waiting and releasing, and the dumper's place is at the first release, where the railroad gives up its load. If you lean carefully and look down, you see little except shadow and the sloped inner walls of the pocket. The depth has a smell of old mineral dust and damp wood. and the air rising from it feels cooler, as though the dock has its own cellar under the tracks. When ore strikes below, the sound comes back upward, thickened and enclosed, as if the dock itself is speaking from its chest. There is a comfort in how plain the work is, once you understand it. The car arrives, the car is placed, the load is released, the pocket receives it, the empty moves on, the next car comes forward. Around that plain shape, the whole harbour has built a world of timetables, wages, weather company rules, lake seasons, and distant steel orders. But the dumper's hands meet the work where it is most immediate. He may be thinking about supper. He may be thinking about rent. He may be thinking about nothing at all, except the latch in front of him and the wind off the water. Workers who do repetitive jobs often keep two minds at once, and you can feel that here, in the way the body stays alert while the thoughts loosen and drift. One part of you counts cars. Another part notices gulls. The gulls are awake now, white and grey in the morning light, hanging near the harbour as if they too have a shift to keep. They cry above the ore dock, thin and sharp, but even that sound is softened by distance and by the steady fall of rock. Across the water, a vessel's stack gives a darker puff of smoke, and the smell reaches us slowly, mixed with the lake's clean, cold breath. The dumper's coat is likely heavy wool or canvas, darkened at the cuffs. In winter and early spring, he may work with a scarf tucked close and fingers stiff inside gloves. In summer, the dust has more freedom, and sweat makes little muddy tracks along the neck. Either way, the ore finds him. It settles on lunch pail, sleeve, mustache, bootlace, and the back of the hand. You begin to understand why nobody remembers the Duluth ore dock dumper in any clean, public way. His work left marks on bodies, not on plaques. It left records in tonnage, not in stories. It helped fill ships that people photographed, and it helped feed mills that people wrote about. But the man opening the car above the pocket stood too close to the middle to be seen from either end. When the string of cars is long, the morning becomes almost musical. Not music in the polished sense, not something played for comfort, but a working pattern with rests and returns. The engine eases forward, the latch gives, ore drops, a door bangs, a voice calls, the next coupler tightens, again and again, with small differences that keep a tired man awake enough and a practiced man steady enough. We stay with those small differences because they are the heart of the job. One car has ore that runs freely, like coarse dry meal. Another holds damp material that clings in corners. One door drops cleanly. Another needs persuasion. One pocket is nearly ready. Another has room. One signal is clear. Another must be repeated, because wind and iron have swallowed the first call. The dumper learns to work with resistance rather than against it. This is true of many old jobs. A person does not conquer the material so much as come to terms with it, using a little strength, a little patience, and a long memory of how things usually behave. He knows the difference between a stubborn latch that will yield and a problem that needs another set of hands. If he calls for help, the call is practical, not dramatic. Men come over, a tool is passed, a few words are spoken. The car is cleared. The shift resumes. Later, perhaps, no one mentions it because the day is measured less by what happened than by whether the work continued. And as the morning light opens fully over the harbour, the work of the 1930s Duluth ore dock dumper begins to blend with the wider motion of rail, water, and waiting steel. From the top of the dock, you can see how Duluth's harbour gathers different kinds of labour into one quiet arrangement. Tracks come in from the west and north. Boats lie below with their hatches open. Warehouses and elevators stand along the water. Smoke lifts from stacks, sometimes straight, sometimes torn apart by wind. And beyond all of it, Lake Superior lies broad and grey, carrying the morning as if it were no heavier than mist. The ore dock dumper is not alone, even when his work feels solitary. Around him are switchmen, brakemen, shootmen, clerks, engineers, vessel crews, watchmen and foremen, each keeping one part of the chain in motion. You may hear boots on planks behind you, a low conversation near the track, a pencil moving over a board in a clerk's cold hand. Someone coughs, Someone laughs once, quietly. Someone adjusts a cap against the wind. There is a whole society of small gestures here. A raised arm means ease ahead. A turned palm means hold. A nod may be enough between men who have worked together for years. The dumper watches those gestures as closely as he watches metal, because the job is not only between man and car, but between man and all the other men whose timing must meet his own. Down below, the ship waits with the patience of a large empty room. Her holds are open to the sky, and inside them the air smells of wet steel, old cargo, bilge damp, and the faint stale warmth of enclosed space. Later, when the chutes are lowered and ore begins to pour from the dock pockets, the vessel will take on weight in a careful sequence, so she settles properly in the water. That balance matters, though it need not trouble us sharply. It belongs to the quiet skill of loading, to men who know where the ore should fall and when a hatch has enough. The dumper's work above is earlier in the chain, but it belongs to the same care. Each car emptied into a pocket is part of a larger settling, a distribution of weight that will ride hundreds of miles across fresh water. In old industrial work, we often imagine only force. We imagine engines pulling or falling, ships carrying, mills burning, as if everything were a contest of strength. But when you stand here with the dumper, you notice how much of the job is actually restraint. Wait until the car is placed, watch the pocket, signal at the right moment. Do not rush a stuck door. Do not step where the dust hides an edge. The dock itself seems to teach restraint. It is high, long, and narrow, with the harbour breathing below and the rails shining faintly ahead. Wind moves differently up here. It comes across the lake with a flat, cold hand, then curls around sheds and cars, lifting dust and tugging at coat hems. You learn to stand with your knees loose, your weight settled, your body making small agreements with the weather. The dumper might have arrived before dawn by streetcar, by walking, or by riding with another man from a nearby neighborhood. Duluth in the 1930s was a working city of steep streets, lake fog, boarding houses, family kitchens and mills and yards, whose sounds carried far in certain weather. A man's day might begin with bread, coffee, oatmeal or fried potatoes, eaten in a kitchen where the windows showed little but darkness, and perhaps the pale shine of frost. By the time he reaches the dock, the private world has narrowed into the public rhythm of the shift. Home smells of stove heat and soap are replaced by ore dust and oil. Conversation becomes shorter, the body prepares itself. A hand that held a coffee cup now holds a rail. A shoulder that shrugged into a coat now turns against the wind. You can feel how the work would erase itself from family stories. At supper, when someone asks how the day went, there may be little to say. Cars came, cars were dumped, weather shifted, a latch stuck, a boat loaded. The plainness of it hides the skill, because a good routine does not always produce a tale worth repeating, even though it has taken a person's full strength to perform it. This is another reason nobody remembers him. The dumper's work was absorbed into the ordinary. It happened so often that it seemed almost natural, as if ore simply moved from train to ship because that was what ore did. But nothing in the harbour moved by itself. Every smooth transfer was made of people, and every people-made process had hands somewhere placed carefully on cold iron. By mid-morning, the dock has lost the hush of dawn, though it has not become loud in a restless way. It is busy with purpose. The sun, if there is sun, touches the ore dust and warms it into a faint, dry smell. If clouds hang low, the whole dock stays grey, and the lake almost disappears into the sky. The dumper keeps working in either weather, because the cars do not become lighter when the day is dull. A lunch pail may sit nearby in a sheltered place. Inside there might be sandwiches wrapped in paper, an apple, a piece of pie, or something left from supper. The metal pail takes on the temperature of the air. When he opens it later, the food will smell briefly like home, flour and fat and coffee, before the dock closes around him again with its stronger smells of iron, water, smoke, and grease. There is gentleness in noticing these things, because forgotten work is often made visible by humble details. A wage record tells us he was there. A photograph may catch him by accident. A company report counts the tonnage. But the real human outline appears in smaller things, in the way he warms his fingers around a cup, The way he rubs ore grit from one eye, the way he saves a dry corner of paper to keep his bread from tasting of dust. We are not here to make the work larger than it was. We are here to let it be itself. The dumper did not need to be a hero to matter. He needed to show up, understand the dock, keep his timing, and do the repeated task with enough care that trains could empty, boats could load, and the vast industrial chain could continue without turning its face toward him. When we place him back into the morning, into the exact cold of the high dock and the steady arrival of cars, the forgotten role begins to take on a quiet dignity. Not grand dignity, not polished dignity, the kind that comes from doing what is needed even when the world only remembers the result. By midday, the Duluth ore dock dumper has passed through enough repetition that the work seems almost to move through him, while the harbour below changes colour with the light. The noon hour on an ore dock is not always a clean division. Sometimes the work pauses. Sometimes it staggers around train movements, vessel loading, or instructions from the yard. But even when there is a break, it is a working break, taken in the shadow of the job, with ears still open for the next signal and eyes still aware of men moving near the rails. You might sit with him where the wind is less sharp, perhaps near a small shelter or behind the side of an empty car. The boards under you hold a faint vibration from distant movement. Your gloves leave dark marks on the paper around your food. Coffee comes from a bottle or pail, warm if luck has held, lukewarm if the morning has been long. It tastes a little metallic, or perhaps that is only the dust on the lip of the cup. Men talk in short pieces at such times. They may mention a boat due in, a child with a cough, a street that froze hard overnight, a foreman's mood, a ball game, a bill, a new car design, a man laid off somewhere, a man taken on somewhere else. In the 1930s, with hard years pressing on many families, steady work had its own quiet gravity, and even tiring work could be held carefully because wages mattered. The dumper's job sits inside that decade without needing speeches about it. The 1930s were years of uncertainty for many workers, yet ore still moved when orders came, and docks still needed men who could carry knowledge in their hands. A shift might feel both routine and precious. The work was hard, but the absence of work could be harder, and men knew that without saying it too often. You notice how the ore dust softens every edge. It lies on boot leather, on couplers, on the tops of boards, on the seams of the lunch pail. It makes the world one color, a muted reddish-brown or dark iron gray, depending on the ore and the light. When a man wipes the place clean with his sleeve, the mark looks almost bright for a moment. Then the dock begins covering it again. This covering is part of forgetting. Dust covers objects slowly. Time covers names in much the same way. The dumper may have been known well enough to the men beside him, and at home he may have been father, brother, uncle, neighbor, or boarder, but the public memory of industry prefers large shapes, not the person who spent a noon break rubbing grit from a sandwich wrapper. Still, while we sit with him, the forgotten becomes present. We hear the hull below creak softly against lines. We hear water slap the pilings, steady and hollow. We hear a far bell from somewhere in the harbour, and the sound reaches the dock thinned by distance. The air smells of damp rope, cooling coal smoke, and the plain food in a worker's hand. After eating, there may be a few minutes when nothing demands him. He looks out over the harbour, as anyone might. The lake has a way of taking the eyes. Even on a working day, even when you are paid for attention and not for dreaming, the open water gathers thought and carries it outward. A man might think of nothing more than weather. He might think of everything. Then a voice calls, or a whistle gives notice, and the pause folds itself away. The body rises before the mind has fully returned. Gloves are pulled on. A crumb is brushed from the coat. The lunch pail is closed. The dumper steps back toward the track, and the day resumes its iron sentence where it left off. Loaded cars wait, and waiting cars have a strange stillness, as if each one is holding its breath above the pocket. The afternoon work feels different from morning work, even when the motions are the same. Muscles are warmer now, but fatigue has begun its slow, quiet arithmetic. The first pull of a latch is no longer the first. The 100th glance down a track is not as fresh as the 10th. This is where a steady worker earns his keep, not by excitement, but by keeping care alive after novelty has gone. You can feel that care in the way the dumper checks himself. He does not trust the day simply because it has been ordinary so far. He looks again. He listens again. He makes room for the possibility that a familiar car may behave badly, or a familiar board may be slick, or a familiar signal may be hidden by steam. Repetition asks for faith, but it also asks for attention. A car comes forward. The wheels make their small rising squeal. The coupler slack runs in with a dull knock. The dumper steps to the release, sets his boots, and opens the doors. Ore drops hard into the pocket below, filling the dark with a sound that seems to come from under the dock and inside your chest at the same time. Dust lifts, catches light, and drifts away. If the ore has been sitting in weather, it may come reluctantly. Dampness makes it cling. Cold can stiffen everything. In winter, men on ore docks knew the trouble of frozen loads, stubborn doors, and material that did not want to move. The dumper in our 1930s Duluth scene works with whatever the day has given him, because weather is not an interruption to the job. Weather is part of the job. He might tap, pry, wait, signal, or call another hand. He might know by long practice where to stand when the load gives way, because a sudden release has its own force and its own dust. The skill is not in making a spectacle of strength. The skill is in knowing how little force may be enough and where that force should be placed. The dock remembers these motions in its worn places. Handles shine where gloves have polished them. Boards are darker where men stand most often. Railings are smooth at the height of a resting hand. Even if the dumper's name fades from records, his kind of work leaves a touch map on the structure, a quiet pattern made by many shifts and many bodies. But structures vanish too. Wooden docks burn, decay, or are replaced. Steel changes use. Concrete outlasts memory but not always purpose. Photographs flatten height and cold and smell into a small rectangle. Later generations may see an ore dock as an impressive industrial relic, but they may not imagine the man who spent his day opening the bottoms of cars in the wind, one load after another. That is why we keep standing here. We let the image thicken again. We put the cold back into the rail. We put the dust back into the throat. We put the sound back into the pocket and the dull ache back into the hand. Remembering a job like this is not only naming it, it is allowing its ordinary minutes to become visible. The afternoon advances without drama. Light moves along the cars. Shadows shift under the catwalks. A gull lands, thinks better of it, and lifts away. Somewhere, a foreman studies the order of pockets and vessels. Somewhere, an engineer waits for the next signal, his locomotive breathing softly, the stack smoke bending with the wind. You are close enough now to feel how a person can belong to a workplace without owning any of it. The dumper does not own the dock, the ore, the cars, or the ship. He may not decide where the cargo goes, or what price it earns, yet for the length of his shift, this small section of rail and pocket is his responsibility, and responsibility has its own kind of belonging. When the bell or whistle marks the next movement, the sound does not startle him. It enters the pattern. He has been listening for it without seeming to listen. The next cars come. The next loads fall. The dock receives, holds, and releases, while the lake waits with its large grey patience. And as the afternoon leans toward evening, the work of the Duluth ore dock dumper turns from simple endurance into the quieter art of finishing well. The last part of a shift can be deceptive, because the body begins to think of home, while the hands must still belong to the dock. You may feel it in the knees first, then in the lower back, then in the fingers that have pulled and steadied and gripped since the grey hour before sunrise. The Duluth ore dock dumper does not let those thoughts hurry him, because a day's work can be spoiled at the edge of its ending, and so he returns his attention to the next car, as if it were the first. Evening light makes the ore look different, deeper in color and softer at the edges, though it has not changed in any way that matters to weight. It still drops with that same thick rush, that same enclosed roar rising from the pocket below, and the dust still lifts in a slow brown veil before the wind takes it. You stand near enough to feel the grit settle on your cheek, and for a moment the harbor beyond the dock seems dimmed, as if seen through old glass. The ship below has taken on more of herself now, because a vessel being loaded gradually becomes a different creature in the water. Her empty height lowers. Her lines draw tighter. The water against her plates makes a fuller sound, less hollow than it did in the morning, and if you look carefully you can see how the hull sits with more certainty, as though the lake is accepting her weight by slow agreement. The dumper above does not need to watch every part of that change, but he senses it in the altered pace of the dock. Messages move back and forth. A pocket may be nearly emptied into the boat, then made ready to receive more from above. The order of cars may matter more as the load plan nears its end, and what felt like plain repetition in the morning becomes a more careful sorting of the remaining work. A man learns the personality of late-day machinery. Metal that was stiff with morning cold may now be warm from friction and handling, but dust has thickened around moving parts, and tired hands can misjudge what fresh hands would catch easily. The latches feel familiar, almost too familiar. This is why he slows inside himself even when the work keeps moving, and why we can feel the quiet discipline of his trade in the small pause before each release. There may be a foreman's voice carried along the dock, flattened by wind and distance until only the tone reaches us clearly. There may be a clerk checking numbers against a board, the pencil end darkened by thumb and ore dust. There may be another worker bending to inspect a door, and when he straightens, he leaves a print of one gloved hand on the car's side, a brief human mark on a surface built for cargo. We follow the Duluth ore dock dumper through those last cars, and the dock seems to lengthen as the day grows old. The rails run ahead in dull lines. The pockets below are unseen but felt. The lake has turned from grey to pewter, and the far shore, if the air is clear enough, lies low and quiet beyond the working harbour. All around us, the place smells of iron, damp timber, smoke, old oil, and the cold breath of water rising between pilings. There is no single moment when the shift becomes memory. It happens by thinning. One string of cars is finished. A smaller movement remains. A signal is given with less urgency because the main weight of the day has passed. Men speak a little more softly, not because they are sentimental, but because fatigue has lowered every voice by a notch, and the dock itself seems to be settling. The dumper may stretch his hand once, opening and closing the fingers inside the glove. He may wipe his face with a sleeve and leave a darker smear across already darkened skin. He may glance toward the city, where lamps will soon show in windows up the hillside, and where kitchens and boarding rooms and narrow beds are waiting for men whose work followed them home in their clothes. You can imagine the return from such a shift, not as a grand homecoming, but as another quiet process. Boots are knocked against a step, a coat is shaken outside if weather allows. Ore dust comes off reluctantly, and some of it never quite does. It stays in cuffs and seams, under nails, and perhaps in the faint stain of a collar, because industrial work often travels farther than the pay envelope and leaves proof in places no company record ever keeps. But before home, there is still the dock. There is one more car, or two, or a small correction to make. A door must be checked. A signal must be answered. A load must fall cleanly. We stay beside him while he completes it, because the last repeated action is not less worthy than the first. In sleepy work, as in sleepy memory, endings deserve patience. The next car rolls into place with the tired dignity of a thing that has already done its long journey from the range. Its wheels slow, the couplers settle. The dumper gives the brief attention of a man who has performed this motion thousands of times, and yet still knows this exact car has never stood here in this exact light before. The latch gives, the doors open, and the ore falls away from the railroad into the waiting pocket. For a few breaths, the world is mostly sound. Ore striking ore, steel answering steel, dust moving through air, water below tapping the dock. Then the noise thins and separates, and the empty car seems suddenly lighter in spirit as well as load, ready to be drawn away from the place where it has given up its burden. This is the small ceremony nobody names. A loaded car arrives from inland darkness, full of broken iron-bearing stone taken from the earth, and on the high dock at Duluth, a worker opens the path downward. Nothing about it asks for applause. The work is too practical for that, too repeated, too much a part of the ordinary day. Yet it is a ceremony all the same. if a ceremony can be made of timing, gravity, and trust. When the final movement of the shift is done, the dock does not become silent at once. Machines take time to leave off, chains settle, wheels continue somewhere beyond sight, voices carry in fragments, then disappear. A shovel scrapes, a door is secured. The locomotive breathes in the distance, as if thinking over the work it has pulled through the day. The dumper looks over the place in the way workers do, not admiring it exactly, but checking that the day has been left in order. Tools belong where they can be found. Walkways should be clear. A small problem noticed now is easier than a larger one discovered tomorrow in cold rain. The habit of care continues even after the main labor ends, because routine is not only repetition, but also the keeping of a place fit for repetition. Evening gathers in the corners of the ore dock first. It darkens the spaces under cars and along the inner walls of pockets. It makes the water between pilings black before the sky is fully dim. Lamps begin to matter. A small yellow glow from a work light touches dust in the air, and for a moment, every drifting particle becomes visible, rising and falling as gently as ash from a far-off stove. You can feel why this job was forgettable to outsiders. It did not leave a finished object that could be held in the hand. It did not produce a shining tool, a printed page, a woven cloth, or a loaf cooling in a window. It transferred weight from one container to another, and then into another still, and the proof of the work sailed away before anyone thought to remember the hands that had started it downward. And yet the absence of a finished object is not the absence of meaning. A great deal of human labor has always been transfer, tending, sorting, opening, closing, measuring, keeping watch, and helping one part of the world arrive safely at the next. You know this perhaps in your own quiet ways, because much of what keeps a day whole is never displayed at the end of it. It has simply allowed other things to continue. The 1930s Duluth ore dock dumper belongs to that kind of work. He is remembered, when he is remembered at all, as part of a system rather than as a person. And his title sounds almost like a function of the dock itself. But if we stay with him in the evening air, with ore dust in the cuffs and lake wind under the collar, he becomes more than a line in a vanished payroll. He becomes a worker completing his day. The harbor begins to soften as lamps appear along the shore. Reflections tremble in the black water, broken by small waves and the slow movement of vessels. The high dock, so hard-edged in daylight, seems to loosen into shadow. Its beams and chutes and rails still hold their shapes, but they no longer insist on themselves quite so sharply, and the whole structure feels like a large animal at rest after carrying weight. The dumper may walk back along the track with other men, boots sounding differently now that the work is done. Their voices are low. Someone may make a small joke, tired and harmless, the kind that belongs only to people who have shared the same cold wind all day. Someone else may say nothing, keeping thoughts folded inward, already feeling the pull of supper, warmth, or sleep. As we walk with him, we notice the descent from the dock as a change in the body. Up on the working deck, the wind had the authority of open height. Lower down, near the yard or street, the air feels more crowded, touched by coal smoke, wet earth, horse or truck smells, and the familiar human odors of a city evening. The lake remains nearby, but the dock no longer surrounds us completely. This is the hour when industrial places become strangely tender, if you are tired enough to see them without argument. A switch lantern glows near the rail. A puddle holds the last light. A coil of rope lies dark and heavy on a plank. A man closes a shed door with more care than force, and the small click of the latch seems almost domestic after the day's larger iron sounds. The dumper carries the dock with him in a way no photograph can show. His shoulders remember the pull. His ears remember the fall. His skin remembers dust and wind. Even after washing, some part of the day remains in the body's private archive, and perhaps in sleep he will hear a softened version of the cars moving forward. Not enough to wake him, just enough to blend with breath and dream. The city has its own evening rhythm now. Streetcars move along their lines with sparks and hum. A shop door closes. A stove is shaken down. Somewhere up the hill, someone carries a pail. Someone calls a child in. Someone sets a plate on a table. The ore that passed through the dumper's hands has entered another chain of motion, but his own chain leads back to the simple needs of a tired body. Food tastes different after such work. Bread has more substance, coffee has more kindness. Even a plain stew, held in a chipped bowl with both hands, can feel like a small restoration after a day spent in wind and dust. You can imagine him sitting quietly, not needing to explain the dock, because the dock is already present in the way he bends over the bowl, in the slow opening of his hand, in the heaviness of his eyes. If there are children nearby, they may know only that he works on the ore docks. They may picture ships, trains, and large machinery, but not the exact motion of opening a car above a pocket. Many jobs disappear that way, inside family knowledge, known generally but not truly seen. And by the time anyone thinks to ask for details, the workers may be gone or the docks changed beyond recognition. That is how forgetting often happens. Not through neglect that feels cruel at the time, but through ordinary evenings, through meals to cook, bills to pay, children to raise, shifts to sleep before, and years in which nobody imagines the plain routines will ever become mysterious. The Duluth ore dock dumper did not need to explain himself because everyone around him knew enough. Until one day, almost no one did. We can let that thought pass gently, without turning it into sadness too sharp for the room. Every age is full of work that supports life without asking to be remembered. Someone closes valves, someone sweeps platforms, someone tests lamps, someone counts sacks, oils hinges, checks gauges, trims wicks, sorts letters, and opens car doors over ore pockets in a cold harbor before dawn. The quiet value of such work lies partly in its trustworthiness. It happens again and again, often without witness, until the world begins to treat it as a background condition, like weather or daylight. Only when it stops does anyone turn around. The dumper's reward for doing the job well was that the job seemed almost invisible, because no delay, spill, or confusion called attention to his place in the chain. Night comes fully over Duluth, and the dock behind us becomes a dark shape against darker water. The ship may still be loading under lamps, or she may be heavy and ready, waiting for departure when orders, weather, and crew align. The pockets hold what they hold. The rails cool. Dust rests on every flat surface, patient as snow but darker, and the day's footprints lie briefly in it before the next shift writes over them. This is a good place to understand why nobody remembers the 1930s Duluth ore dock dumper, and also why, for tonight, we do. He belonged to the middle of a process, and the middle is where memory often thins. He worked where material changed hands, not where it began or ended. He stood in a place built for throughput, and throughput rarely pauses to name the person who made the passing possible. But when we slow the motion down, the middle becomes a world. The high dock returns. The loaded cars return. The smell of ore dust and lake water returns. The cold handrail returns beneath your palm. The worker returns too, not as a monument, not as a legend, but as a man in a cap and heavy coat, looking down into the pocket as the last stones rattle through. There is peace in that kind of remembering, because it does not ask the past to become brighter than it was. It allows the work to remain plain. It allows fatigue to remain fatigue, dust to remain dust, and repetition to remain repetition. It simply keeps company with the person inside the routine, and sometimes keeping company is enough. Long after the shift, the ore continues its journey without him. The boat moves out through the harbor, past lights that tremble on the water, and onto Lake Superior, where weather and distance take over. The cargo lies deep in her holds, dark and motionless, though the vessel rises and falls around it. It will pass through locks, channels, rivers, and ports, perhaps toward furnaces far away, where other workers will meet it in another form. The dumper may never see that later stage. He does not need to. His part was completed when the ore left the car and entered the dock, when the door opened and gravity took hold. There is a humility in work whose result is always handed onward, and if you rest with that thought, it begins to feel less like disappearance and more like continuity, one person's task joining another's without needing to be the final word. In the deepest part of night, after the city has quieted and only necessary sounds remain, the ore dock stands with a patient stillness. A watchman may make his rounds. A lamp may burn in a small office. Water moves against pilings with a soft, hollow knock. Somewhere, a chain shifts in the wind and then falls still again. The tools are where workers left them. The rails hold a faint sheen. The pockets wait in darkness, empty or partly filled, ready for morning's wait. If the dumper sleeps nearby, in a house or room somewhere above the harbor, his body is slowly giving back the labor of the day, breath by breath, while the dock keeps its shape under the stars. And we can leave him there for a while, not gone, not famous, not forgotten in this moment, but resting inside the simple truth of work completed. The harbor is quiet now. The oar lies still. The high dock keeps watch over the water, and the last dust of the day settles softly on iron, timber, and rail. Morning returns without asking whether anyone is ready, and the dock, which rested in darkness a few hours before, begins again to gather sound. The first light comes pale over the harbor, spreading across rails, roofs, ropes, and the still water between pilings, while the Duluth ore dock dumper climbs back toward the high working deck, with yesterday's dust not entirely gone from his cuffs. There is comfort in how a place can begin again. The same boards receive the same boots, the same wind tests the same coat collar, the same pockets wait under the same rails, and though the world beyond Duluth may be unsettled by money, weather, orders, and distant decisions, the first work of the day is still simple enough to meet with 2 hands and a steady breath. You follow him upward, step by step, and the height returns before the sun has fully warmed the dock. The harbor below is muted, with the water dark under a thin wash of silver, and the ships at the slips seem half asleep, their rigging and hatch covers marked by dew or frost. A gull calls once, then another answers, and the sound hangs for a moment in the morning air, before the switch engine answers with its lower voice. The dumper pauses near the track, not idly, but with that worker's stillness that is really a form of reading. He reads the weather, the condition of the boards, the placement of cars, the temper of the machinery, and perhaps the mood of the men around him. A dock is never exactly the same twice, even when the task repeats, because cold, damp, dust, fatigue, and timing rearrange themselves in small ways each day. This is one reason the work could not be done carelessly, even though it looked plain from a distance. An outsider might say the ore dock dumper simply opened car doors as if any hand could pull any release at any time and let gravity do the rest. But you and I have been here long enough to know that the simple description leaves out nearly everything the body must learn. It leaves out where to stand when a stubborn load breaks loose. It leaves out how to hear a pocket filling beneath the deck. It leaves out how to understand a brakeman's signal through steam and wind, and how to keep track of cars when the day has become a long brown ribbon of iron, dust, and repetition. It leaves out the way caution becomes part of muscle memory, so deeply settled that a man may not speak of it at all. The 1930s Duluth ore dock dumper worked at a point where railroading became harbor work, and harbor work became shipping. He belonged to none of those worlds completely, yet he touched all of them. Behind him were mines, grades, blasting, shoveling, loading, weighing, and the long pull down from the iron ranges. Before him were pockets, chutes, holds, lake weather, canals, furnaces, and the restless hunger of industry. Between those larger worlds, his daily task remained wonderfully narrow. Bring the car into place, open the bottom, watch the fall, check the empty, move the next car forward. The narrowness did not make it small, it made it exact, and exact work often hides itself behind the ease it creates for everyone else. A morning string of cars waits on the dock, dark-sided and heavy, each one holding ore that has already traveled through more hands than most people will ever imagine. The ore inside may have been drilled from rock, blasted loose, shoveled, crushed, sorted, and carried by rail through forest, town, and yard. Now it has reached this high place above Lake Superior, and its next movement depends on a man whose name may never have appeared in any public account. You can hear the switch engine before the cars move, a low pulse through the rail and timber. The vibration comes up through your boots. It is not violent, only insistent, like the dock clearing its throat. The dumper watches the lead car approach, his face turned slightly away from the wind, and when the moment comes, His hand gives the signal that belongs to the day's first release. The car settles over the pocket. Metal clicks and groans. The latch is worked. Then the oar drops, and the dock fills with that broad enclosed sound. The sound of weight becoming motion. The sound that would have marked more of his life than any clock. Dust rises in the cold light, and for a breath or two the air tastes dry, mineral, and faintly bitter on the tongue. You might think that such a sound would become dull after years. Perhaps it did, sometimes. Men are practical creatures when they must work. Yet there are sounds that remain present because the bobby must answer them, and this falling oar was one of them. Neither music nor noise exactly, but an instruction repeated through the bones of the dock. It told the dumper whether the car had emptied, whether the flow was clean, whether the morning could continue. The next car comes forward, then the next. The day begins to lengthen into work. There is an old kindness in routines that are understood, even when the work is hard. You know what your hands must do. You know what the next few minutes will ask. You know the smell of the place, the slope of its shadows, the small delays it favors, and the certain tools that are always colder than you expect when you first touch them. The Duluth ore dock dumper may have lived within uncertainty beyond the dock, but here the routine gave shape to the hours. The lake remains present through everything, though the work rarely turns fully toward it. You catch sight of it between cars, beyond railings, below the long line of the dock. It is blue only on kind days. More often it is grey, green, pewter, black, or a color without a simple name, and its surface can look soft from above while holding enough cold to humble any person who forgets where he is. Wind carries water smell into the ore dust. It softens nothing, but it changes the air. The smell is not clean in the way of open country, because the harbor has coal smoke, bilge damp, creosote, wet rope, engine oil, and the sour sweetness of old timbers. Still, there is something cleansing in the lake's breath, and when it comes strong across the dock, it clears the throat of dust for a moment before the next car empties. The dumper may not name these things while he works. He may simply live among them. That is often how place enters a worker, not through grand description, but through repeated mornings, through cold hands, through the angle of light on the same railing, through knowing where puddles form after rain and where the wind takes your words when you try to call across the deck. By the time someone writes history, those details are difficult to recover. Records preserve tonnage more readily than texture. They preserve dates more readily than breath in cold air. They preserve the names of companies, docks, vessels, and ore grades, while the person who opened the car doors becomes part of a phrase like dock labor, yard crew, or loading operations. Useful words, perhaps, but not warm ones. So we warm them again by standing here with him. We notice the rubbed leather of his gloves. We notice the edge of his cap darkened by moisture. We notice how he shifts his weight before pulling, how he looks down after the load is gone, and how he does not waste anger on machinery that resists. A stubborn latch is not an insult. It is simply the next thing the work has become. When a door hangs, the rhythm alters. Men feel that alteration at once. The sound is wrong, the flow incomplete, and the car keeps part of its weight when it should have given everything to the pocket below. The dumper steps in with care, perhaps using a bar, perhaps calling another worker, and the whole dock seems to wait around that small problem. Not anxiously, only attentively. Then the blockage gives. Ore drops in a delayed rush, heavier because of the pause, and dust leaps from the opening as if startled awake. The men stand clear. A few last stones rattle out. Someone says a word or two, the sort of plain speech that repairs the moment without decorating it, and the line begins again. This is the hidden shape of many working days. Smoothness, interruption, correction, smoothness. The memory of a trade is built partly from interruptions solved so often that they no longer feel like stories. If the dumper told them all, no one could sit through the telling, and if he told none, the work would seem easier than it was. So the truth rests in between, in the steady calm of practiced attention. The Duluth ore dock itself, rising over the harbor, was a machine large enough to make men seem small in photographs. Yet from the inside, it was also a series of reachable places: a rung, a lever, a board, a brake wheel, a door edge, a handrail. Every huge structure becomes human at the point where someone has to touch it, and the dumper's world was made of those touch points repeated across the day. You may notice how the light now reaches under the cars. The rails shine along their tops. Frost or dew disappears from exposed metal, leaving darker streaks where moisture has run through dust. The worker's breath no longer shows as strongly, but the cold remains tucked into shadows and into the iron itself. When he rests one hand briefly on a car side, the chill comes through the glove. The morning continues in a wide, unhurried circle. It is not idle, and it is not slow to the company ledger, but to us, listening from a softened distance, it has the pace of repeated motion. The car, the latch, the fall, the check, the signal, the next car. Again and again, with enough variation to keep the mind awake and enough sameness to let the body move almost as if remembering a song. There is a small peace in being competent at something plain. Not celebrated, not praised, perhaps not even noticed by anyone beyond the immediate crew, but competent in a way that lets the world rely on you. The dumper knows his place in the sequence. He knows when to act and when to wait. He knows which sounds belong and which sounds require attention. For a working person, that knowledge can be as grounding as a chair by the stove. As the morning wears on, we move with the 1930s Duluth or dock dumper, from the first clean releases of the day toward the quieter complications that gather when weather, machinery, and human tiredness begin to share the same narrow deck. A mist may come in from the lake without ceremony. It does not arrive as a wall. It gathers first around the distance, softening the far cranes and roofs, then settles among the dock timbers until the harbor seems smaller and closer. The ore cars remain solid beside you, dark and beaded with damp, and the worker's coat takes on tiny drops that catch dust and turn it into a fine paste along the sleeves. Damp weather changes the work. It thickens the air and dulls some sounds while sharpening others. A chain nearby may sound nearer than a voice farther down the track. The fall of ore into the pocket becomes heavier and less crisp. Footing asks for more respect. The handrail feels slick, and the boards underfoot lose the dry rasp they had in clearer weather. You feel the dumper adjust to it without complaint. He does not need to announce that the day has changed. His stance changes. His reach becomes a little more deliberate. He keeps his eyes on the place where boot sole meets board, and when he moves beside a car, he gives himself the extra fraction of time that damp wood and ore dust require. Such fractions are almost invisible, yet they are where experience lives. On the dock, visibility belongs to the work as much as strength does. In fog, steam, rain, or blowing dust, the simple act of seeing the next signal can become less simple. The dumper watches for movement, color, posture, and timing, not only clear words. A raised hand through mist may be enough if the men know each other well. A misunderstood signal can waste time, and wasted time has a way of spreading down the line. Still, the mood remains low and steady. No one needs drama to respect the conditions. The harbor has taught its workers that weather is a companion with changing manners, and if today it chooses mist, then the job will be done in mist. The ore does not apologize for clinging. The iron does not apologize for being cold. The wind does not apologize for taking a man's words out over the slip. A car rolls forward, wet along its seams. The dumper works the release. For a moment, nothing falls, and the pause is longer than it should be. He listens. We listen with him. Then a first small run of ore breaks loose, pattering down like stones shaken from a shovel, and after that the main weight gives way in a dense sliding rush that makes the car shudder against its own emptiness. The pocket below receives it, the dock speaks back. Dust and mist mix into a dull cloud. When the flow ends, there is residue clinging inside, and perhaps that will need attention depending on the rule of the moment and the need for clean emptying. The dumper glances, judges, and acts within the ordinary boundaries of his job. There are no speeches in such decisions. The body consults memory, the eye measures enough, the hand reaches for what the next movement requires. We can linger here because the forgotten worker is not found in a single dramatic instant, but in hundreds of small judgments. Each judgment passes almost too quickly to preserve. How hard to pull, how long to wait, when to call, where to stand, whether the sound below is full enough, whether the car has truly given up its load. History often rounds these things down to labor, but labor is made of judgments like these, stitched close together. The Duluth ore dock dumper also lived with the clock of shipping seasons, though each single day might feel self-contained. Lake Superior did not offer the same work in every month. Ice, storms, navigation, demand, and railroad flow shake the year around the dock. In the open season, movement could feel relentless, with ships to load and cars to clear before weather or schedule interfered. In slower times, the same place could seem enormous and underused. A worker knew that rhythm through his household as much as through the dock. Busy seasons meant tired evenings, steadier pay, sore hands, and clothes that carried the harbor indoors. Slack times meant waiting, asking, calculating, and listening for word of work. The job was never only the hours on the dock. It reached into cupboards, rent, shoes, coal bins, and the quiet arithmetic done at kitchen tables. Yet, on the working deck, those wider concerns had to narrow again. The next car did not become lighter because money was short. The latch did not open more kindly because a child needed boots. Work can be merciful in that way and hard in that way. It gives the mind something definite to do, while leaving the rest of life waiting at the edge of thought. The mist thins after a while, as lake mist often does, and the harbor returns in pieces. First a mast, then a roofline, then the dark side of a vessel below. Light comes through with a cool, pearly quality, turning dust on the rails into a muted sheen. The men look slightly ghosted by dampened ore, their coats marked and their faces plain with concentration. You can imagine someone clearing his throat, someone spitting dust carefully away from the walkway, someone rubbing a wrist before taking hold again. These are not decorative details. They are the small maintenance of the body during work. Machines are oiled and checked, so are people, though less formally. A stretch, a sip, a warmer place for the hands, a minute out of the wind when the line allows it. By late morning, the dumper's motions have deepened into the day. His first stiffness is gone, replaced by fatigue that has not yet become heavy. He is warm inside the coat now, though the air remains cool, and his shirt may cling slightly under the shoulders. Ore dust has found the damp places first. It gathers at the collar, the cuffs, and the crease where glove meets sleeve. The job marks him in layers. There is the visible layer of dust. There is the bodily layer of ache and habit. There is the mental layer of sequence, signal, and watchfulness. And there is the quieter layer that may be hardest to name, the way a person comes to measure time through repeated tasks, not by clock faces alone, but by the number of cars emptied, the change of light, and the taste of coffee when the morning's first hunger arrives. We stay with that measuring for a while. The car count becomes a kind of calendar. The full pocket, the cleared string, the arriving locomotive, the vessel's progress below, all become units in a day that would otherwise seem too large and too industrial to hold in the hand. The dumper holds it by pieces, and each piece has a sound. A clean latch has a sound. A reluctant one has another. Empty wheels have a different voice than loaded wheels. A nearly full pocket answers the falling ore in a way the dumper may feel more than consciously hear, and over months or years, such differences make a private language between worker and dock. The dock does not speak in words, but it is not silent to those who know it. At the edge of the work, clerical order continues. Numbers matter. Cars are not simply dumped anywhere, and ore is not a shapeless burden once it reaches the harbor. Grades, owners, destinations, and loading plans all move quietly through the day, carried on paper, chalk marks, spoken instructions, and memory. The dumper stands where that paperwork becomes matter, where a line on a sheet becomes rock falling through air. There is something satisfying about that crossing. Many people spend their lives moving between instructions and objects, between names and things, between what has been planned and what must actually be done by hands. The Duluth ore dock dumper knew that crossing in a direct way. A car listed for a pocket had to reach the pocket. The door had to open, the ore had to fall. The record became real only when the work accepted it. If a visitor had come to the dock and watched from a safe place, perhaps he would have been impressed for a few minutes, then distracted by the size of the ship or the view of the harbor. The dumper's repetition might soon have seemed monotonous to him, but monotony is often what a visitor calls a pattern he has not had time to understand. To the worker, the pattern has weather inside it, and trouble inside it, and small differences enough to fill a life. This is true of many forgotten jobs. The outsider sees the same motion. The worker feels the thousand variations. A typesetter sees not just letters, but spacing, pressure, and line. A lamplighter sees not just flame, but wind, wick, glass, and ladder. An ore dock dumper sees not just falling rock, but timing, flow, door, pocket, car, signal, and the mood of the dock underfoot. The more we watch him, the less invisible he becomes, not because he asks for attention, but because attention gently given restores proportion. The great ore movement was not made only by great forces. It was made by small, repeated competences, held by people who often left little writing behind them. The dumper is one of those people, standing in the mineral dust of a working city, doing the task that allowed the next task to begin. By the time the noon hour comes near, the Duluth ore dock dumper has become part of the dock's own rhythm, and the dock, in turn, has become part of his breathing. The pause arrives gradually, not like a curtain falling, but like pressure easing from a held rope. One movement finishes, another has not yet begun. The locomotive waits with a faint hiss. Men look toward food, shelter, or simply a place where the wind is less direct. The ship below remains open and patient, while the pockets hold their dark measure between rail and water. You sit near the dumper again, somewhere practical, because workers do not choose picturesque places for lunch so much as sheltered ones. The surface beneath you is dusty. The air is still cool, the food is plain, and after the morning's mineral taste, even plain food seems to carry a softness from another world. Bread smells like flour and home. An onion, an apple, or a wrapped piece of cake feels almost bright against the dull iron tones of the dock. The men around him eat without much ceremony. A few words pass. A match is struck, if someone smokes, and the brief sulphur smell appears, then is lost among coal smoke and lake damp. Someone may mention the fog lifting. Someone may ask how many more cars are expected. Someone may say the boat below is taking cargo well, which is a practical comfort, like saying a stove draws properly or a door shuts tight. You notice how the dumper's hands behave at rest. They do not become soft just because the work has paused. They flex, rub, hold the cup carefully, brush crumbs away before the dust can claim them. Hands that have opened car doors all morning carry the memory of resistance, and even at lunch they seem ready to return to the next latch when the dock asks. This lunch break, small as it is, may be one of the few times in the day when the worker sees the whole scene without acting on it. The harbour opens below. The ore cars stand in line. The vessel lies under the dock with her hatches like dark rectangles. Smoke moves along the water. The city rises behind, steep and busy, with houses, churches, shops and streets stacked above the working shore. From here, Duluth is not an idea but a layered place. Rail below hill, dock above water, ship below dock, ore above ship, men between every layer. You can feel the practical arrangement of geography, how the city used its height, harbour and rail lines to become a meeting point for inland rock and inland water, and how one worker's day fit into that arrangement as neatly as a pin in a hinge. The dumper may not think of himself as part of geography. He may only know where he works and how to get there. But the body often understands what language leaves alone. It knows the slope of the walk home, the direction of weather, the sound of boats leaving in darkness, and the way a lake city smells different when wind comes over water than when smoke settles under low clouds. We are quiet with him for a little while. The work will return soon enough. The pause is not empty, and it does not need to be filled with explanation. It has the small holiness of a worker eating in the middle of a shift, with dust on his coat and warmth leaving his coffee more quickly than he would like. When the break ends, no one announces a new beginning in a grand way. A man stands. Another closes a pail. A last swallow is taken. Gloves return to hands. The dock gathers them back, not harshly, but completely, because the work has waited just long enough, and no longer. The Duluth ore dock dumper steps again toward the track, and the afternoon opens in front of him with the same old demand, made new by light, weather, and weariness. The first car after lunch often tells the body the truth about rest. For a few minutes, the muscles feel reluctant, as if they had believed the pause might last longer. Then the old motion returns. A hand finds the grip, the feet settle, the eyes read the position, the release gives, and the oar drops away in a full rolling rush that seems to shake lunch, thought, and daydream from the air. Afternoon light has a thicker quality on the oar dock. It shows every dust mark more plainly. It warms one side of a car, while the other remains cool. It makes the lake glare if the sky has cleared, and the brightness can force a worker to narrow his eyes beneath the brim of his cap. Even beauty on a working dock has to be managed, because glare can hide a signal as surely as fog. The dumper works through it with the patience of someone who has no need to admire or resent the light. It is simply part of the conditions. He turns his head when necessary. He shades his eyes. He trusts the familiar outline of a man's arm against brightness, the movement of the engine, the spacing of cars, and the sensed rhythm of the crew around him. In this way, the day continues to be read. Sometimes the harbour breeze comes up stronger in the afternoon. It moves dust along the deck in fine low sheets. It snaps at loose paper and presses clothing against the body. It carries voices away, then returns others from unexpected directions. The dumper learns not to depend on sound alone when the wind behaves this way. He uses sight, habit, and timing together, like a person listening with more than ears. Below, shootmen may be tending the flow into the vessel, and though their task differs from his, it shares the same covenant with gravity. They guide what he has helped place into waiting pockets. They manage gates, spouts, and the distribution of ore into holds. The ship grows heavier by their care, and the dock grows lighter, then fills again, an enormous breathing between rail and water. You can imagine the vessel's crew hearing the oar from below, a deep drumming in the hold, muffled by steel and cargo space. To them, the dock above might be mostly sound and shadow. To the dumper, the vessel below might be mostly presence and requirement. Each group knows the same process from a different angle, and no single person sees the whole chain except in pieces. That is how industrial life often works. One worker stands at a valve, another at a lever, another at a scale, another at a hatch, another at a desk, and the finished movement belongs to all of them, without belonging entirely to any one. Memory, however, likes ownership. It asks, who built, who commanded, who invented, who founded? It is less patient with those who enabled, tended, repeated, and kept the flow steady. So the oar dock dumper slips from memory partly because his work was shared with the structure itself. The dock dumped, the railroad delivered, the ship loaded. The language assigns action to systems, and systems have a way of swallowing the people who gave them motion. But if you listen closely, behind every system there is a hand at the right moment, and behind every hand there is a person who was tired by evening. The afternoon brings another line of cars, and by now the dumper's coat is thoroughly marked. Dust has dried in some places and darkened in others. His gloves may be stiff at the fingertips. His boots carry a paste of mineral and damp grit along the soles. When he shifts his footing, tiny grains scrape under leather, a small, rough sound almost lost beneath the larger movement of the dock. A young worker, if there is one nearby, watches the older habits and learns by seeing more than by being told. He notices how the dumper does not lean too far. He notices where he places the bar, how he waits before stepping close, how he looks after the flow ends rather than turning away at once. Old jobs were often taught in such quiet apprenticeships, not formal in the schoolroom sense, but exact in the bodily sense. The older worker may offer a word now and then, not many. A short correction, a warning, a plain instruction. The rest is learned by repetition, and repetition is a strict but generous teacher if a person survives its early mistakes. Slowly the novice begins to hear what the experienced man hears. Slowly the dock becomes less of a confusing roar and more of a set of separate voices. Perhaps the 1930s dumper we follow was once that younger man. Perhaps he first came to the dock uncertain where to stand, overwhelmed by height and machinery, trying not to show too much fear or eagerness. Over time, the work entered him. The track became familiar. The oar's fall became familiar. The weather's moods became familiar. Then one day, without ceremony, he was simply a man who knew the job. This kind of becoming rarely receives a date. No one writes down the day a worker stopped being new. No plaque marks the first time he recognized a bad sound before anyone else did. Yet that becoming is the hidden education of labor, and it matters as much to the life of a dock as any blueprint or schedule. A structure may be engineered in an office, but it is made dependable through workers learning its habits. The Duluth ore dock dumper carries that dependability in ways we can only partly see. He knows when a release should feel smooth. He knows when a door may swing with more force than expected. He knows when to give an empty car a second look. He knows how to keep his body clear while still close enough to do the work. He knows when the wind will carry dust back into his face and when it will take it outward over the slip. Afternoon grows older. The line of cars shortens, or seems to. Another line may be waiting behind it, because docks and railroads have their own ideas about endings. Still, the light has begun its slow tilt. Shadows lengthen beside wheels and under car frames. The harbor's noises take on a different depth, as if evening, still far off, has already begun laying a hand on the water. You feel the weariness now in the pace of gestures. Not slowness, exactly, and not carelessness. More like economy. The dumper has no extra flourish in him. Every motion that remains is useful. Pull, step, watch, signal, reset, move. The day has pared him down to the essential, and there is a quiet beauty in that, because a tired, competent person often moves with a simplicity that younger energy cannot imitate. The oar falls again. The pocket answers. The dust rises. The ship waits. The rhythm could seem endless if you looked only at the next car, but the worker knows every day has edges. He knows by light, by body, by the changing voices of men, by the order of remaining cars, and by the subtle shift that comes when a crew begins to think not of beginning or enduring, but of finishing. Finishing has its own caution. It is hopeful, but it must not hurry. And as the afternoon begins to loosen toward the long grey evening, we remain with the Duluth ore dock dumper at the high point between rail and lake, where the forgotten middle of industry keeps opening, holding, and letting go. The evening comes slowly at first, not as darkness, but as a change in the surface of things, a softening along the rails and car sides. The Duluth ore dock dumper feels that change without needing to look for it, because the light begins to slide under the brim of his cap differently, and the cold from the lake starts to gather again in the sleeves of his coat. The ore dust, which seemed dry and ordinary in the afternoon, takes on a darker tone where damp air touches it. Even the sounds feel lower, as though the dock has begun speaking from farther inside itself. There are still cars to handle, and the last stretch of a working day asks for a steadiness that is almost a kind of patience with oneself. You can feel the body wanting the shift to end, but the work does not become symbolic just because the light has turned beautiful. The next latch still has its own stubbornness, the next load still has its own weight, and the pocket below still waits with the same practical silence it kept in the morning. The dumper gives the car his attention, because attention is what the dock has always required from him. A foreman may pass along a word about the remaining cars, and that word travels through the crew in small pieces. Men do not need long explanations now. They understand from tone, gesture, and the number of loaded cars still standing on the track how much of the day is left. You stand with the dumper as he glances down the line, reading not only machinery, but the fatigue in shoulders, the pace of boots, and the way each man has begun to save his motion for what still needs doing. The harbour below has taken on the colour of worked metal, and the vessel's deck lamps begin to glow before the sky is fully dark. Their light touches the lower chutes, catches on damp patches of steel, and makes the open hatches look deeper than they did at noon. Farther off, the city climbs the hillside in quiet rows, and you may see a few windows beginning to show warmth, each one holding a different evening that the dock workers cannot yet enter. The ore dock remains its own world a little longer. When the next car settles over the pocket, its wheels give a small sigh against the rail, and the couplers answer with a tired knock. The dumper steps forward, works the release, and waits through the brief resistance of old metal under dust. Then the doors open, and the ore begins to fall, first in a heavy sheet, then in broken streams, then in scattered stones that rattle after the main body is gone. The sound rises through the dock like a deep breath released into timber and iron. You can imagine how many times that sound must have occurred in Duluth, across seasons of shipping, through years when ore moved steadily and years when orders thinned. It would have been heard in fog, sun, rain, sleet, and early snow, heard by men who were young and then less young, by workers who stayed a season and workers who spent much of a lifetime near the harbour. The sound itself may have been one of the city's forgotten clocks, not chiming the hour, but marking the passage of weight from inland rail to waiting water. The dumper may not have thought of time that way. He had more immediate measures. A car emptied well, a pocket took the load, a shift was nearly finished. A vessel would be ready sooner if nothing delayed the next sequence. The mind of a working person often moves by necessary steps, and the large pattern only appears later if someone has the leisure to step back and look. But we are stepping back gently while staying beside him, and that lets both truths remain. The work is just a latch, a door, a fall of ore, and another car moving on. It is also part of the making of rails, bridges, machines, buildings, boilers, plows, ships, and all the iron things that disappear into ordinary life once they have been shaped and painted and given different names. The dumper stands near the beginning of that long transformation, but his part remains hidden because it is too early in the chain to resemble the finished world. A worker in a mill might see molten heat. A machinist might see a polished surface emerge. A carpenter might stand back from a frame and recognize the shape of a house. The ore dock dumper sees a car become empty and a pocket become full, and the satisfaction is quieter, almost private, because completion here means readiness for another transfer. His work's finished form is not an object. It is permission for the next movement to begin. That kind of work can be hard to remember because it is always handing itself away. Yet so much of life is like that. You wash a cup so someone may drink again. You sweep a floor so feet may cross it without thought. You open a gate, trim a lamp, count a load, mend a strap, and by morning the action has vanished into usefulness. The Duluth ore dock dumper belongs to this large family of disappearing labours, and tonight we stay with him long enough to see the disappearance happen slowly. The last cars of the sequence seem to stand with a particular stillness, as though they know they are being waited on. Their sides are marked with numbers, chalk, grime, and the dull shine of handling. Along their seams, old rain has carried ore dust downward in narrow streaks, and under the car bodies, the shadows are thick with brake rigging, wheels, springs, and the complicated underside of a simple load. The dumper sees what he needs from all of this, and the rest becomes the familiar background of his day. You may feel your own breathing slow with the dock's rhythm. The car comes in, the latch is worked, the ore falls, the empty moves away. Nothing announces itself as remarkable, and yet the repetition begins to soften the mind, not because it is empty, but because it is trustworthy. The same motions come back with small differences, like waves along the pilings, and each return carries you farther from hurry. The worker's face in the evening light would not be easy to read. It may show concentration more than feeling, and fatigue more than thought. Men doing physical work often keep their expressions plain, not because nothing is happening inside them, but because the body is busy holding the day together. The eyes move where they must. The jaw sets against dust and wind. The shoulders rise or lower with the effort of the next small task. As another car empties, a gust carries dust back across the deck, and everyone near it turns slightly away. The dust is dry against the lips, gritty along the teeth, and for a moment, the lake smell disappears under mineral powder. Then the wind shifts, and the harbour returns wet and cold and faintly smoky. You learn that even breathing on the dock has a rhythm, a turning with the gusts, a small cooperation with air that cannot be commanded. This is the kind of knowledge no payroll book records. It does not say that a man learned when to close his mouth against dust, or how to blink without losing sight of a signal. It does not say that gloves stiffened after damp mornings, or that a lunch pail could smell faintly of ore no matter how it was wiped. The record may say he worked. The body would have said how. The Duluth ore dock dumper's name, if we had it, would still not contain the full person. It would not tell us whether he hummed under his breath, whether he preferred coffee strong or thin, whether he had a favorite place to stand out of the wind, or whether he ever paused to admire the way lamps trembled on the harbor. The absence of those things is not failure. It is simply the distance between living a day and preserving one. Still, we can be careful with the distance. We do not have to invent a grand inner life to give him dignity. We can let the known work be enough. A man stood on the high dock in Duluth in the 1930s, among rails and pockets and lake wind, and helped move iron ore by repeated skilled action. That plain sentence holds more quiet weight the longer we sit with it. The evening work moves on, and the dock becomes more dependent on lamps. Shadows gather in the spaces under cars. The release gear looks darker and more particular, each handle and bar standing out only when a light catches it. The dumper knows the equipment by touch as well as sight, and in low light that knowledge becomes a kind of companionship between hand and machine. He does not grope. He reaches where memory tells him the iron will be. A vessel's whistle may sound somewhere beyond the slip, not loud enough to startle, but deep enough to travel through the chest. The harbor answers with smaller noises, rope against bit, water against hull, a voice below, a chain shifting and settling. These sounds do not interrupt the work. They enlarge it. They remind us that the dumper's narrow task belongs to a harbor that is still awake, still exchanging cargo, signals, smoke, and time. If the day has been long, a man may begin to think in fragments. The next car, the warm kitchen, the last pull, the pay envelope, the ache in the wrist, the sound of a child's voice, the need to wash before touching anything clean. Thoughts come and go between actions, not in neat order, but as small lights through the working mind. The dock allows a few of them, then calls him back with iron. The next latch is harder than expected. It does not yield at once. The dumper sets himself, not with anger, but with that practical firmness that old equipment teaches. Perhaps another man notices and steps nearer without being asked. A tool is used. The metal gives a dry sound, halfway between a scrape and a complaint, and then the door releases. The load falls, and the little knot in the day unties itself. No one celebrates. There is no need. The success is the return of routine, and in such places, routine is often the most welcome outcome. You can feel the men settle back into the pattern once the trouble passes, because a solved difficulty is not always remembered as an event. Sometimes it is remembered only as a tightening in the shoulder that eases when the line moves again. The ore in the pocket below is invisible now, but its presence changes the dock's hidden balance. Below our feet, the bins hold accumulated weight, each load placed there by the repeated opening of car doors. Later, or perhaps at the same time, that weight moves downward again toward the boat through gates and chutes, and the dock's purpose is fulfilled in two directions, receiving from above and giving below. The dumper works at one mouth of that exchange. There is something restful in understanding a machine by its purpose. The ore dock is not mysterious once its rhythm is felt. It lifts the railroad high, stores gravity in pockets, and lets the lake boat come beneath the cargo rather than making men lift the cargo down by hand. It is a structure built to make weight behave, and the dumper's task is to release that behavior at the proper moment, neither too soon nor too late. The oldest kinds of labor often live close to weight. Carrying, lifting, lowering, hauling, dumping, stacking, and shoveling are basic verbs of human work. In Duluth, by the 1930s, those verbs had been enlarged by railroads, dock design, and industrial scale. But the dumper still stood near the old center of the matter. Something heavy needed to move downward, and a person had to decide when and how the path should open. That is why the job feels both obscure and deeply understandable. Few people may know the title now, and even fewer may picture the exact place above the ore pockets, but the motion itself belongs to a long human memory. We have always watched weight. We have always listened for a load to settle. We have always known, somewhere in the hands, that a heavy thing released without care can teach a harsh lesson. The evening makes every lesson quieter. The men are not careless, but their voices have softened into the end of the day. A lantern or lamp throws light across a worker's sleeve, showing a reddish-brown coating of dust. The dumper bends slightly, checks the door, and straightens with the slow economy of someone who has repeated the same motion far beyond counting. His shadow stretches along the deck and breaks across the rails. The city lights grow clearer now. Duluth rises behind the docks, house by house, street by street, with the hill catching lamps before the waterfront has entirely surrendered the day. From up here, if the air is clear, those lights might seem close enough to belong to the dock itself, but they are another world, full of stoves, curtains, dishes, beds, and ordinary voices not raised against machinery. The dumper will return to that world carrying the harbour on his clothes. It is easy to imagine someone at home recognizing the smell before he has taken off his coat. Ore dust has a blunt presence. It clings differently than coal soot, flour, sawdust, or barn dirt. Each trade has its own trace, and families often knew the workplace through those traces, even if they never stood where the work was done. A child might know the dock by the smell in the hallway, the grit in a cuff, the dark water in a wash basin. Work enters domestic life in such humble ways. A towel darkens, a collar is scrubbed, a lunch pail is rinsed, boots are placed where falling dust will do the least harm. Someone shakes a coat, and the day falls out of it in a small cloud before supper. The Duluth ore dock dumper's labour may have been invisible to public memory, but it was not invisible to the room where he removed his gloves. Back on the dock, one of the final cars of the day is brought into place. The engine eases forward with a low puff, and the wheels move only as much as they must. The dumper watches until the car is centered where it should be, because the precision of the whole structure depends on these modest alignments. Then he works the release, and the car gives up its load in a rush that briefly fills the evening with the sound of inland earth descending toward water. For a moment, you can think of the oar's long stillness before all this motion. It lay in the ground through winters, summers, forests, rains, and the passing of people who never imagined this dock. Then tools, explosives, shovels, rails, and engines brought it here, to a high structure in Duluth where a worker's hand opened a path and sent it onward. The job is ordinary, but the journey inside the ordinary is vast. The dumper does not need that vastness in order to do the work. Perhaps it would even be a burden to think of it too often. A worker cannot carry the whole story every time he pulls a latch. He carries the next task. He carries enough memory to do it safely. He carries the weather, the signal, the feel of the iron, and the knowledge that each small action must be completed before the day can move on. This narrowing of attention is not a failure of imagination. It is a kindness the mind gives the body. If every ordinary act arrived with its full history, no one could finish breakfast, sweep a floor, or walk to work. So the dumper works with the immediate thing, while history, geography, and industry gather quietly around him like the harbour fog. We, from our drowsy distance, can let those larger meanings enter softly, without disturbing his hands. The last load in this sequence falls with a slightly different sound, perhaps because the pocket below has less space, or because the ore is damp, or because evening makes all sounds rounder. The dumper listens until the fall is done. A few stones clatter after the rest. Then the door is checked, the signal is made, and the emptied car is drawn away from the pocket. Its work, like his, is not finished forever, only finished here. There is relief in that phrase. Finished here. So much of life asks only that from us. Not finished everywhere, not solved for all time, not transformed into something worthy of display, but finished here, in this hour, with this tool, on this narrow deck above cold water. The Duluth ore dock dumper's day is made of such completions, and perhaps that is why it can soothe us now, because it gives shape to effort without asking it to be endless. As the last cars move off, the deck opens in places that were crowded before. Empty track has its own quiet. Without loaded cars standing beside him, the dumper can feel the width of the sky more clearly, and the drop toward the harbour seems larger again. The pockets below, filled or partly filled, hold the day's work in darkness, while the boat beneath the dock continues to receive what the structure is ready to give. The men begin the small tasks that follow the main task. They check, secure, clear, and put away. Nothing about this ending is dramatic, but it matters. A tool left wrong becomes tomorrow's irritation. A missed fault becomes tomorrow's delay. A walkway cluttered at dusk becomes a danger in morning frost. The habit of finishing well is one of the oldest comforts in work, because it lets the next beginning arrive without needless trouble. The dumper's hands move more slowly now, but still with purpose. He may brush dust from a surface where it matters, or test that a door has closed as it should. He may return a bar to its place, speak briefly with another man, or stand for a moment while instructions pass down the line. The air is colder. The lake has darkened. The day that began with pale rails is becoming a harbour night. When he finally turns from the working position, the motion is small, but it changes everything. The body no longer faces the next car. It faces the way back. You feel that shift in your own shoulders, the loosening that comes when attention can widen a little and the mind is allowed to remember hunger, warmth, and the private world beyond the dock. The work is not forgotten, but it is no longer in front of him. We walk with him along the deck, where dust lies thick in the seams, and footsteps leave soft marks that may last until wind, rain, or another shift erases them. The rails, so commanding during the day, now seem like dark lines guiding tired men homeward. Beneath the dock, water moves with a hollow slap, and somewhere below, a voice rises, then disappears into the mingled sounds of ship, chute, and harbour. The high place begins to empty of people. From this angle, the ore dock no longer seems only a machine. It seems like a workplace after the workers have given it most of their day, and that is a different kind of object. It holds effort, it holds routine, it holds weather, missed jokes, small irritations, careful saves, ordinary hunger, and the quiet pride of making a difficult thing proceed without spectacle. Buildings can hold such things for a while, even if memory later loses them. At the foot of the descent, the air changes again. The harbour level has more smells, more dampness, more human nearness. You may smell tar, mud, horse or motor exhaust, rope fibres, old fish from some distant corner, and the ordinary smoke of a city settling into evening. The dumper's boots meet ground that does not vibrate with pockets beneath it, and for a moment walking feels simpler than standing did all day. He may say good night to someone, though the words are plain and brief. Men who will see each other again at dawn do not always spend words heavily at dusk. A nod can carry enough. A tired joke can carry enough. A question about the next day's start can carry enough. Then each man turns toward his own route, and the crew that moved as one body through the shift loosens into separate lives. The Duluth ore dock dumper walks away from the structure that will outsize him in every photograph. Behind him, the dock remains, tall and dark and practical, with its rails above and chutes below, its pockets holding iron ore in silence. Ahead of him are streets, lamps, perhaps a streetcar, perhaps a climb uphill, perhaps a room with a stove that does not ask anything of him except that he come in and warm himself. It is in that walking away that forgetting begins, and also where remembering can begin. The work stays behind, because it must. A person cannot carry the dock home in full. He carries only its traces. The dust, the ache, the smell, the pay, the timing in his muscles, and the softened roar that may remain in the ears after a long day of falling ore. These traces fade by morning, or almost fade, and then the next shift renews them. We let him walk slowly, because there is no need to hurry the end of a workday that was never hurrying us. The streetlights shine on damp ground. The harbour wind follows for a few blocks, then weakens among buildings. Somewhere, a door opens into lamplight. Somewhere, water heats for washing. Somewhere, a plate waits and a chair waits, and the ordinary tenderness of being done for the day begins to gather around him. Behind him, high over the harbour, the ore dock keeps its darker watch. The loaded cars have moved on, the empty cars wait elsewhere. The ship lies deeper in the water, holding what the day has given her. Dust settles softly on iron and timber, not as an ending, but as the quiet covering that comes after every repeated task, until another morning hand reaches out, finds the cold release, and begins again. Dawn does not feel new on the ore dock so much as returned, like a familiar coat lifted from a peg and settled again on tired shoulders. The harbour receives it first in pale strips of light along the water, then the rails begin to show. And finally, the high structure of the Duluth ore dock takes shape from the darkness, piece by piece, as though the night has been carefully unfastening it. You climb with the dumper again, because work remembered this way has no single day, only a gathering of days laid softly over one another. One morning may have frost, another may have rain, another may open under a clear sky with stars still faint above the lake, while the first switch engine moves below with a breathy patience that seems older than all the men on the dock. The routine remains, but each morning arrives wearing its own weather. The Duluth ore dock dumper knows the place by repetition, and repetition is a kind of map the body keeps without paper. His feet know the rise and the worn boards. His hands know the colder places on the rail. His eyes know where the first light will strike the car sides, and where shadows will hide damp patches until a boot finds them. He does not need to speak this knowledge aloud for it to be real. There is often a quiet before the first movement, but it is not silence. It is the small sound of a working place gathering itself. A door closes somewhere below. A chain tightens and relaxes. Water taps the pilings with a hollow, patient rhythm. Men speak in low voices that do not carry far in the morning air, and their words mix with the smell of coal smoke, wet timber, cold iron, and the mineral dust that never fully leaves. You can feel how the dock belongs to both land and water, though it is entirely comfortable in neither. Behind us, rail lines and yards bring the ore forward from inland places, from cuts and pits and ranges where the stone first left the ground. Below us, the lake waits with its immense level surface, receiving the ships that will take the load away. The dumper stands between those two worlds, high enough to feel the wind and close enough to touch the release. The first cars of the day are heavy with the stillness of things that have traveled far and then waited. Their wheels are dark against the rails. Their sides hold dents, numbers, streaks, and hand-worn places. The ore inside is invisible from where you stand, yet its presence can be felt in the slight compression of springs, in the deep posture of the car, and in the way the engine handles the line with careful force rather than casual ease. When the car moves into place, everyone's attention narrows. It is a small narrowing, practiced and calm but complete. The dumper watches the alignment over the pocket. The brakeman watches him. The engine waits on the signal. The dock holds the load beneath its feet like a held breath, and for a moment the whole movement of mine, railroad, dock, and ship gathers at one latch. Then the release comes. Ore drops downward in a heavy rush that fills the morning with a sound both rough and steady, a dark rolling sound that seems to belong to the earth more than to any machine. The car lifts slightly as it empties. Dust rises. A few stones strike and ricochet somewhere below, each one making a smaller note after the main body has fallen. The dumper watches until the sound tells him the first car is done. There is nothing theatrical in the way he turns to the next task. A clean dump is not a victory. It is the expected result of attention, timing, and a machine doing what it was built to do. Yet expected things deserve respect, especially when they depend on many parts agreeing at once. The car must be placed. The door must open. The pocket must be ready. The worker must be standing where the job can be done without foolishness. This is the old comfort of industrial routine. When seen from close enough, it is not a blur of noise and smoke. It is a sequence of exact acts. Each one is small enough for a person to understand, and together they move more weight than the person could ever lift. The Duluth ore dock dumper participates in that larger strength by knowing his small part fully, and there is a kind of restfulness in such knowing. As the morning gathers force, we remain beside the Duluth ore dock dumper, where the first easy rhythm of the day begins to meet the thicker demands of car after car. By mid-morning, the dock has found its working voice. The early scattered sounds have joined into a pattern. Wheels and couplers, footfalls and signals, the falling ore and the answering timber. You begin to hear the difference between waiting and motion. A still loaded car has a dense quiet around it. An empty moving away sounds lighter, even if the same steel wheels carry it, because the ear, after a while, learns to believe in weight. The dumper's work does not require constant strength in the way a stranger might imagine, but it requires strength often enough and judgment always. A release may yield with a clean pull, or it may need coaxing. A door may swing as it should, or it may hang in a stubborn angle that changes the whole mood of the moment. A load may run freely into the pocket, or it may cling and then give way all at once with a sudden density that makes everyone nearby stand carefully clear. You stand a little behind him, where the dust reaches you after the first sharp cloud has passed. It settles along your sleeve, fine and dry, not like the dust of a house or road, but heavier somehow, as though each grain remembers the ore body it came from. When you breathe, the air tastes faintly of iron. When you swallow, you become aware of your throat, and you understand why a worker might pause for coffee not only from hunger, but from the need to wash the dock out of his mouth. The coffee itself is plain, dark, and practical. It may be carried in a bottle wrapped against the cold, or poured from a battered pail during a brief pause. Its steam disappears quickly in the lake air. A worker holds it with both hands if he has a moment, warming his fingers through metal or enamel, and even that small warmth becomes part of the shift's private economy, saved and spent between cars. No one on the dock has much use for romance while the work is underway. The beauty comes later, or comes quietly enough not to interrupt. It is in the way morning light turns dust into a faint red haze. It is in the long line of cars curving back toward the yard. It is in the vessel below, open and waiting, and in the simple fact that men have learned how to move a broken piece of the earth from inland rock to waterborne hold by means of rails, pockets, doors, and repeated signals. The dumper may only glance at that beauty without naming it. His duty is closer. The next car has come forward. He checks the position, listens for the slack to settle, then steps into the practice space where his hands can work and his body can stay out of the wrong path. This balance between nearness and distance is one of the deep lessons of the job, because he must be close enough to open the way and far enough to respect what opens. A clean running car is almost graceful. The doors drop, the ore descends, and the load narrows itself into the pocket with little argument. A troublesome car has a different personality. It holds back, it gives a short fall, then stops. It invites impatience, and impatience is not a useful companion on the dock. The dumper may tap, pry, signal, or wait, but he does these things with the practical calm of someone who knows that stubborn wait cannot be scolded into obedience. When a bridge of ore breaks inside a car, the release can sound like a small collapse. The first clinging mass lets go, then the rest follows in a deeper roar, and the car shivers, as if relieved. Dust pushes up around the opening, and the worker turns his face slightly, not dramatically, only enough. The body knows how to protect itself without leaving the task. These adjustments become so ordinary that they vanish from later telling. A man home from the dock might say the cars were sticky today, or the damp made things slow, and that may be all. The whole complicated morning of resistance, judgment, timing, and care collapses into one plain sentence over supper. Work often becomes modest in the mouth of the worker, partly because there is too much of it to explain, and partly because tomorrow will ask for the same strength again. The Duluth ore dock dumper also works inside a network of trust that is rarely visible from a distance. He trusts the engine crew to move only when signaled. They trust him to keep clear and communicate plainly. The men below trust the pockets and chutes to receive the ore in the right order. The vessel crew trusts the loading plan, the dockmen, the weather reports, and the steadiness of lines and hull. No single trust feels grand, yet all of them together hold the day in place. You notice how much of this trust is carried by gesture. A hand lifts, a shoulder turns, a man points with the slight economy of someone who knows he is understood. In cold weather, words can be stolen by steam, wind, distance, and the covering noise of falling ore, but gestures remain large enough to be seen and simple enough to survive the harbor's confusion. The dumper belongs to that sign language of work. The harbor continues around him with its own errands. A tug may pass beyond the slip, low in the water, and purposeful. A vessel's stack may release smoke that flattens under a low ceiling of cloud. Somewhere a bell rings, perhaps from a boat, perhaps from a crossing, and the sound moves through the industrial air, softened by distance. These things enter the day at the edges, but the dumper's center remains the car above the pocket. A shift on the dock is made of centers that keep renewing themselves. The current car is the center, then the next car, then the next. The world can be approached that way when it is too large to hold all at once. You take the one task placed before you, complete it with care, and allow the next to arrive. The ore dock, with all its huge weight and commerce, becomes manageable through a series of small, definite attentions. This is part of the sleepiness of watching such work from our distance. Not dullness, but manageability. The mind is not asked to leap, solve, fear, or hurry. It is invited to follow a rhythm that has already been followed by others, a rhythm in which each action prepares the next, and nothing needs to be grasped all at once. The dumper's day, though tiring to live, becomes restful to imagine because its demands arrive in order. And as the morning's last stretch draws near, the Duluth ore dock dumper moves toward the hour when hunger, dust, and the slow accounting of progress begin to share the same worn place beside the track. The light now lies more firmly on the dock, and the early cold has retreated into shadows beneath the cars. Men have stopped moving like people newly arrived and now move like people fully inside the day. Coats are open at the throat if the weather allows. Gloves have darkened with use. The caps and shoulders around you carry a common dusting so that each worker seems slightly made from the same material as the dock itself. The dumper's face may be lined with dust in the places where sweat has made narrow paths. His eyes look clearer by contrast, though tiredness has not yet become heavy. He has crossed the first long bridge of the shift, from the stiffness of beginning to the warmed steadiness of work underway. There is often a quiet satisfaction in that passage, even if no one remarks on it. The body has agreed to the day. A clerk or foreman may come near with papers, or call instructions from a place where he can see the arrangement of cars and pockets. The language may be practical and abbreviated. Numbers, car marks, pocket assignments, vessel needs. To a stranger, it might seem dry. To the dock, it is the thread that keeps material from becoming confusion. The dumper listens only for what belongs to his part, and that is enough. You can see the way large systems depend on selective attention. No worker can hold every detail of the ore trade, the railroad schedule, the vessel's draft, the mine's production, and the steel mill's appetite. Each person holds a section. The dumper holds the release point. He makes sure that when the car reaches him, the ore leaves it properly. And by doing that, one thing well, he supports decisions made far beyond his sight. The car in front of him has a smear of fresh damp near the door seam. He notices it. Perhaps it means nothing. Perhaps it suggests a load that may cling. His hand moves with a little more expectation of resistance. The latch works, the door opens, and the first fall is slow enough to prove him right. Ore begins to pour, then thickens, then runs clear, and the pocket takes it with the muffled steadiness of something designed for exactly this patience. You begin to understand that the job is not merely dumping, despite the title. It is watching the quality of departure. A load can leave well or poorly. A car can empty cleanly or reluctantly. A day can move smoothly or become knotted by small delays. The dumper stands at the place where departure must be encouraged, checked, and confirmed again and again until the line of cars has given up what it brought. The word dumper may sound blunt, almost too simple for the person we are following, but old job names are often blunt because the work itself was visible to the people who used them. A riveter drove rivets, a stoker fed fuel, a caller called trains or shifts or numbers. A dumper dumped, yes, but inside that bluntness was a whole education of timing, safety, judgment, weather, and machinery. The plain word carries more than it first appears to carry. No one remembers the job, because the word did not invite memory. It sounded like a function, not a life. Yet here, with the dock beneath us and the lake beyond, the function opens. It has a coat, hands, hunger, weather, and a place to stand. It has morning stiffness and evening dust. It has the small inward pride of a car emptied cleanly and the small annoyance of a door that refuses to behave. A whistle sounds somewhere close enough to turn a few heads. The dumper looks, reads the movement it belongs to, then returns to the car. The ability to notice without being distracted is another quiet skill. On a harbor dock, many things call for the eye, but not all of them are yours to answer. Work teaches a person to sort claims on attention, and the sorting itself becomes almost instinctive. The noon pause is near, and the food waiting in a pail begins to have a stronger presence in the mind. You may feel it too, the way hunger makes the smell of bread imagine before the hand touches it. The last cars before a break can seem longer than they are. Yet the dumper does not speed them. A rushed car does not feed anyone sooner if it causes trouble. The work must end its morning properly before the man can eat. One more load falls. The sound rolls downward, then thins to scattered strikes. The dumper watches the last stones go. He checks what must be checked, answers the signal, and steps back as the empty car is drawn away. The line pauses. The engine's breath becomes more noticeable in the sudden easing of other noise. Men begin to turn toward their lunch places with the modest relief of people who have earned sitting down. As moon settles over the Duluth ore dock, the dumper leaves the release for a little while and returns to the simpler human work of eating, warming his hands and letting the morning drift out of his shoulders. The place chosen for lunch is not comfortable in any polished sense, yet it is better than standing in the wind. Perhaps there is a sheltered wall, a small shed, the lee of a car, or a place where the sun reaches without too much glare. The boards smell of dust and dampness. The pail opens with a metallic sound. Paper unfolds. Bread appears, slightly flattened, and whatever is inside it carries the tender ordinariness of food prepared before dawn. You sit with him in that modest shelter, and for a few minutes the dock becomes a background instead of a demand. The harbor still moves, the vessel still waits, men still talk, cough, smoke, chew, and shift their boots. But the next latch is not immediately in front of him, and that small distance changes the whole quality of the hour. The body receives permission to notice itself. His fingers may ache as they warm around a cup. His shoulders may feel heavier once they are no longer held in working readiness. Dust may have settled along his eyelashes, in the creases beside his nose, and in the fold of cloth where the collar meets the neck. When he eats, he may taste the dock and the food together, because no worker in such a place keeps the world perfectly divided. The talk around lunch has a drifting quality. Someone mentions a vessel that loaded faster last week. Someone complains mildly about damp ore. Someone says a street was bad with mud or ice. Someone wonders about tomorrow's weather. The subjects do not need to be interesting to be companionable. They only need to be shared. And in that sharing, the workers become less like separate figures on a vast dock and more like men keeping a day together. You may hear a laugh, but it is a low one, worn smooth by fatigue and familiarity. There is no need for brightness. The warmth in it comes from recognition, from the way a small remark can belong precisely to the people who understand the same cold, the same stubborn doors, the same foreman's habits, and the same long walk back when the shift is done. Workplaces build such little languages, and most of them disappear when the workplace changes. The dumper looks out toward the lake while chewing slowly. The water has shifted color again, perhaps to a dull blue under a broken sky, perhaps to gray if clouds have returned. A ship's hull below seems enormous from this angle, yet it too is only one part of the chain. Its crew will have their own meals, their own watches, their own aches, and their own small jokes that never leave the vessel's rail. There is an unspoken fellowship among people whose work touches the same cargo. The miner, the brakeman, the dumper, the shootman, the deckhand, the engineer, the mill worker, each one receives the material in a different state and passes it on. They may never meet, and some may never imagine the exact motions of the others. But the ore connects them more faithfully than conversation could. It passes through their days and carries their effort forward. The Duluth ore dock dumper rests in the middle of that fellowship. He is not at the origin, and he is not at the end. He is one of the necessary middle hands, the kind history easily compresses because the story wants beginnings and outcomes. But a working world is mostly middle. Most of us live there, tending transitions, carrying one thing to another, making sure a door opens, a note is kept, a load is received, a path remains clear. That thought can rest beside us without becoming heavy. It is only a gentle truth of labor. The middle is not a lesser place. It is where continuity lives. The dumper's hand on the latch is a middle act, and yet without middle acts, nothing travels, nothing arrives, nothing becomes useful beyond the place where it began. The lunch break thins as all breaks do. A man folds paper back around what remains. Another knocks ash away. Someone closes a pail and stands with a small grunt, not from age necessarily, but from returning a tired body to use. The dock, which had been background for a few minutes, begins to come forward again. The cars are still there, the pockets are still there, the afternoon waits with its own weather. And when the Duluth ore dock dumper steps back toward the track, the simple act of returning to his place feels like entering a current that has never fully stopped. The first car after lunch comes into position with the same iron patience as all the others, and he receives it with the steadiness of a man who understands that rest and work are not enemies. They are turns in the same long day. The release is worked, the ore falls, afternoon begins,